Short-run cost curves, the basics. Once again, we're going to talk about cost in three ways: total cost, average cost, and marginal cost. Okay, I'm going to warn you right now that this is probably going to be the most boring lecture you're going to have all semester. But it's also very short, so at least the pain won't last very long. What I'm basically going to do is to use these three different concepts: total costs, all the production costs; average costs, the costs per unit of output; and marginal cost, the cost of producing the last unit, and give you the equations for the costs that fit into these categories and when they're combined with the other categories that we talked about. That way you'll have all the equations in one place, and you'll have all the material ready to use for the rest of this week and next week as well. Okay, so let's get started with our equations. Notice that we're not only interested in the type of categories that we used for production last week: average, marginal, and total, but we're also going to distinguish between the costs for fixed and variable inputs. That is, our first equation is total cost equals fixed cost plus variable cost. Or we're going to use a lot of abbreviations this week and next week. TC for total cost equals FC for fixed cost plus VC for variable costs. Economists love abbreviations in English and sometimes even in Greek, as you've seen. So you're going to have to get used to it. It's just the way we are. All right, so now let's combine this idea of fixed and variable costs with our average and marginal cost ideas, particularly total costs and average cost. So we've already got our first equation: total cost equals fixed cost plus variable costs. Let's go through and divide each element on both sides of the equal sign by Q. So we take total cost and divide it by Q. That equals fixed cost divided by Q plus variable cost divided by Q. Or we can rewrite that as average total cost equals average fixed cost plus average variable cost, where ATC is the average total cost, AFC is the average fixed cost, and AVC is the average variable cost. Notice, you can tell right now we have to be talking about the short run because we've got the fixed cost in there. So one thing I want to point out is there's two ways you can kind of toggle back and forth between looking at the average costs and total costs. You can either go through and divide through by Q from your original equation, TC equals FC plus VC, or you can add, if you want to get the average total cost, or ATC, at any particular level of output, you can just add together the average fixed cost at that level of output and the average variable cost at that level of output. Okay, so here's our basic equations we're going to play with in many different ways over the rest of this week. Total TC equals FC plus VC. ATC equals AFC plus ATC. And marginal cost, or MC, equals the change in total cost, or TC, divided by the change in output, which I should put as Q there. Now, these are the basic equations we're going to use. If you want to get a more intuitive feel for how this works, I've included a video from the Khan Academy where they basically have sort of a hypothetical firm, and they go through and they compute all these things in a spreadsheet from total cost, what the variable cost would be, and the fixed costs and the average variable and all that kind of stuff. So I really recommend that you watch that video. It's pretty elementary, but you'll have a much more intuitive feel for how these equations work once you watch it. Okay, so let's move on to more complicated stuff.